All right. So to start off the afternoon sessions, we're going to talk about funding opportunities and gaps. Gary Mann is here with us from Forest Health Protection. FHP, of course, manages a big part of the funding that you all use, so he'll talk about some of their current uses and where they're thinking about going in the future. Brian Kittler is here from the Pinchot Institute. He's talked to some of you over the past couple of months to get a sense from you how you're stitching together money and learning from different regions on where you're having success, where others are having success, and has some thoughts maybe on how over the next year or so we can think about how to continue to spread those ideas across all of the regions. I should note too, Brian's here because he loves Whitebark pine, but also he's feeling a little guilty that Gifford Pinchot is the one who brought white pine blister rust to North America. So he's here for atonement. And I'll finish up by talking a bit about some of the conversations we've had in American forests with corporations and foundations about efforts like this and give you a sense of where things are going and some ideas for a path forward. But let's get started with Gary Mann, FHP. Oh, this will make your job a little easier. I wanted to mention that Justin and Eliza went above and beyond duty. They went to Big Sky Brewery and they got free drink tickets for you. You can use them anytime that you're here at the conference or even after it's over. It's different than the social that's happening on Wednesday, but I just want to let you know that's where those come from. And thanks, Big Sky, for the free beer.
Okay, free beer. Good, easy. Also, since we're talking about travel, I think I have everybody beat. I have like 30 hours of travel that I'm trying to get over last week. So, yeah, on this funding thing, let me preface that I'm just going to talk about funds that are related to forest health protection that we help to support all these efforts. And just realize that there's a lot of other efforts, a lot of other funds from research, R&D, and from National Forest System. And oftentimes, what we support is in partnership, in collaboration with these other staffs, and actually including other federal agencies. So I won't really focus too much on that, but just realize that in addition to what I'm saying is the work that we do, in a way we all support it. But I'll just focus on those things that Forest Health Protection focuses on. So I'll talk about this kind of in a little bit of history or what we've done in the past, but really all these activities that I'm going to be talking about still occur today, and there's opportunities, and we continue to fund these programs to some degree. Of course, we're all being faced with funding challenges, so the amounts may vary. And I don't have a PowerPoint because basically all the slides that you've seen before, I'd have the same slides. Because a lot of what's been talked about already and what will be talked about, I think you'll see forest health protection has at least a hand in there, if not more. One area that we support or we have a program on is a whole set of competitive grants, cost share grants that either focus on EM, evaluation and monitoring, or STDP, tech development, that has supported a lot of the initial survey work that's been done on where whitebark pine is located. And I think some of that work actually is more than 10 years old. And I think even that continues on. So resurvey, remeasurements have occurred through these kinds of funds. So those funds are available. Unfortunately, you missed the proposals are being kind of rolled up now, and so you missed the due date for that. But there's always next year. Another area that we that we help to support is the protection of the trees, primarily for mountain pine beetle. As Mary Frances mentioned, mostly focusing on the plus trees or the select trees to protect them so that that others can go back to them later and they're still there. I will mention too, there's only one program that's specific to whitebark pine. All the other programs are part of a bigger program. For instance, this protection of whitebark pine trees is really under a program we have on western bark beetles. So it's a much bigger program than whitebark pine itself. Another area is supporting all the screening work, both at Dorena and at Coeur d'Alene. Again, a lot of it is cost shared. We don't fund the whole thing, but we help to support that effort so that it can, instead of doing 100 trees to sample, maybe we can do now 200 or something. So it helps. But again, that's not a specific program to just whitebark pine. Another program that we have is that we started about 5 years ago is on gene conservation. and working with folks in the field, both Forest Service and other agencies, we're at a little over 1,000 individual trees that have been collected for gene conservation purposes and scattered throughout the range, at least the range in the United States. So what we're interested in is not that necessarily that an individual is resistant to blister rust, because we're interested in what about the next thing that comes. Do we have the diversity, genetic diversity that perhaps may provide a solution in our collections? So there's a little bit of, there's some gaps still. Actually, the gaps are around this area. But for the most part, I think for whitebark pine, we have the range covered, at least for the first round. And as we get more informed studies, we can fine-tune those collections. And many of those sites not only have, they have multiple individuals per site, maybe 4 or 5 in addition in one stand. So we kind of can get some within population variation into some degree. And those are all stored in Fort Collins at the ARS facility there. Probably the program that most of you heard about is the Whitebark Pine Restoration Program. And I think that was started in 2007, right, Rob? To focus on looking at ways to that we can restore whitebark pine. And a lot of the work has been on, in the past, has been on seed collections and testing out technologies. For instance, I think one project looked at, can we just throw a bunch of seed out there, and what kind of predation there might be, and so those kind of questions. And not, in the beginning at least, not so much actual trees in the ground, true restoration. Some of that, but not a whole lot. I'm told now that it's getting more towards that tree planting kind of proposals, more and more. So actually, it's probably a good time to kind of try and expand opportunities so we can get towards restoring not just the 7,000 acres, but I don't know what the inventory is, but the 100,000 acres level. And the current program that we have on that Forest Health has is not going to be able to accommodate, large-scale restoration. The final area that I would like to mention is that we have, again, as a part of a bigger program, an outreach program. We have a relationship with the American Public Gardens Association, and a lot of it is focused on the gardens. And you say, why the gardens? Well, I'll tell you two facts, and hopefully you'll understand. One is there's 650 or so gardens throughout the United States, big, large, medium, all kinds, rural, urban. And the other fact is that they receive 100 million visitors a year. So, so we're taking advantage of that, that situation, and we've developed a series of signs that gardens can put in, hopefully in front of appropriate species, and they can tell the whitebark pine story and why we need to care about whitebark pine. There's also a activity book for K through 12 on white pine blister rust, and again, whitebark pine is a part of that story. And finally, about 2 years ago, Richard Sinesco's this entrepreneur, and so he says, hey, I got some extra whitebark pine seedlings that I'm just going to toss. We run our trials, and do I want them? So I contacted the gardens, and we got 7, I think 7, could be 8 now, 7 gardens throughout the U.S. to take, I think between 5 and 10 or so whitebark pine seedlings. And what we ask them to do is when they outplant them for display, that they interpret that and again tell the whitebark pine story. So we have gardens ranging from Cornell Plantation in the east to Morton Arboreta to Denver Botanic Garden to Hoyt Arboreta and the National Arboreta. That's not 7, but there's 7 of them scattered to the U.S. And so again, it's just a small way to that we're able to tell our story about why whitebark pine. So if you have other ideas about working with gardens and to kind of outreach to the public, let me know. So those are some of the broad programs that Forest Health supports. And I guess we're going to have questions later. Okay.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brian Kittler. I'm with the Pinchot Institute for Conservation. We're a national conservation organization based in Washington, D.C., and I direct our Western Regional Office in Portland. A lot of the work that I do is related to conservation strategy and conservation funding. So, Eric contacted me to see maybe you could take a look at a basic snapshot of where we're at relative to funding restoration on whitebark pine. So what I'm going to talk about is really preliminary, and it's based on sort of a rapid assessment of exactly that. And I'm also here to atone for Gifford Pinchot's sins of blister rust transmittal to the United States. So basically, I set out to try to document some of the different funding strategies and programs in place and being used across the range within the U.S., mainly focusing on the National Forest System, but to the extent that the agency works with external partners, landowners, and other administrative units, looking at how they partner and how that funding maybe moves across borders there. And really understand how folks on the ground are using the different authorities and funding tools to accomplish all the work that's been talked about this morning. And hopefully identify a few ideas for where we could go with ramping up planting and restoration via the strategy that we were talking about earlier today. So the process has been, again, this is all very kind of preliminary results, but it's been basically conversational. I've had several interviews with Forest Service folks, some email exchanges back and forth, and also talked to folks within state agencies as to how their potential programs could also contribute. We did a national query of the FACTS database with the Washington office, looking at how many different planting projects have been done, at least that are identified in that database. So I've got a look at that. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation's survey that they did that did ask one particular question about funding that's utilized. Okay, so with all those conversations and all that background, I basically identified 10 different funding sources or strategies. The first being appropriated dollars. And some of these codes here, if you're within the Forest Service, this may not line up with your thinking about how you define appropriated dollars, but these are all resources that are appropriated by Congress to the agency and then directed throughout the agency for different things. The two most significant sources of which are the NFVW code, Vegetation and Watershed Management, and the Forest Health Program that Gary just talked about. The second funding category is the reforestation partnerships. And mainly it's American Forest, the National Forest Foundation, to some extent Arbor Day Foundation as well. But based on the survey, it's about less than 10% of the total funding across the range right now is in the reforestation partnerships. A limitation on that funding is that it's really geared towards planting or paying for the cost of seedlings, which is very, very important, but not necessarily the full spectrum of planting associated activities that go into planning or implementing a project. So there's maybe an opportunity there to think about that a little bit more broadly. One comment that I did hear from, I believe it was a line officer, they were describing the reforestation fund as, or I'm sorry, the partnership fund as basically a supplemental source of funding that allows them to move other resources to other priorities, rather than additional funding for more whitebark pine restoration work. So that's maybe a bit of a concern as you're thinking about how these resources are paired up and come together. The third funding pool is the KV and the other associated accounts. So basically, this is a fairly limited funding pool, especially with KV. It has to be, as Forest Service folks will know, funds applied to reforestation within the same sale area of a timber sale contract. The CWK2 funds, however, have been used fairly extensively across the range for investing in whitebark pine restoration project. And a lot of this comes down to the regional priorities established. So if whitebark pine is within the interest and priority list of the regional forester, that's going to allow for more of these funds to move towards restoration priorities. And that's the case with a lot of these different funding sources. Reforestation Trust Fund. So this is about $30 million annually, as I understand it. That's associated with a timber import tariff. And it's basically used as an offset for NFVW funds that would have been proposed to Congress. So to the extent that these resources are available, they can accomplish many of the same activities in terms of reforestation activities. Again, it's a fairly limited amount of money that comes into whitebark, and it's a competitive with all other species and priorities across the national forest system. And we do have a fairly sizable reforestation backlog, so that's something that we have to keep in mind. Something that's come up in the interviews is each region kind of uses each of these funding sources differently in terms of being able to access them and pulling them into projects. Stewardship contracting authorities. Again, this is a tool, a collection of authorities for how the Forest Service can design restoration projects of all different types, basically combining the timber component of land management with restoration work and allowing resource allocation from the timber work into service projects for road decommissioning, fuels reductions, habitat improvements, all a bunch of different stuff. It's a growing source of funding. A lot of the resource-rich forests and regions are using this more and more, and collectively across the nation, it's now accounting for about 25 to 30% of the vegetative management that the Forest Service is doing. So a lot of the money going into things like CFLRP projects or additional money is using stewardship authorities to get those resources to the ground through partnerships. And it's authorities both provided to the Forest Service and the BLM. According to the survey right now, it's fairly not really applied very often, about 3% of the funding, but that really varies from place to place based on resource availability. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this because I'm a bit of a wonk when it comes to stewardship, and I think it's maybe an opportunity as well. So it allows for contracts or agreements up to 10 years in length, which is currently the longest term project length you can do on the National Forest System. It allows the Forest Service to work very directly in partnership through stewardship agreements with nonprofits, local governments, and you can actually use stewardship receipts and resources to fund work through those agreements. And those agreements actually bring private money to the table as well. So typically there's a 20% match component. Again, it allows for actually sole source contracting or agreements as well. So if there's a very unique situation, like whitebark pine restoration, the Forest Service can actually say, you know, we're going to work with this nonprofit because they have specialized expertise and they're going to be able to do this work. In addition to banking of timber receipts to put into restoration projects, that money going towards restoration, you can actually also use in design projects, say within a given watershed. We heard, I think it was Bob talking about a 6-digit Huck watershed, for instance. If you had a restoration project that included a timber component, you could feasibly apply some of those resources to higher elevation pine restoration work. The retention of receipts, I've kind of talked about that a little bit already, but basically it's the concept of applying the revenue produced through a timber harvest or any other commercial-oriented project outside of the sale area. So this is different than the timber sale. You can actually use that money. Typically it's the same administrative unit, but there are some examples of money even going to a different forest. Those are very, very limited though. One thing to note, the Resilient Federal Forest Act that was just passed through the House has some changes that it proposed for extending the contract length up to 20 years and allowing for planning to be used. Typically, salaries aren't covered by stewardship the way that KV is, and potentially reducing the availability for restoration. So I looked at sort of what's the availability or the total amount of stewardship receipts in the whitebark pine system or across the ecosystem. And so you've got the Forest Service regions here on the left, spread across the range. The annual receipts generated adding up to about 25.6 million. You have about 2 million in Region 1, 5 million in Region 6, annual average of about 8.5 million. So it's a pretty big pot of money. Most of it's already allocated and going towards other things, but you could see how, given how this tool has evolved and now being used for a variety of restoration work, it could potentially apply to whitebark. This is just a little bit more. In the Greater Yellowstone, there really is not a lot of opportunity based on the projects going forward and the amount of timber-oriented work that's done. But on some of the other national forests, there could be, where they're banking about $1 million worth of receipts per year. I looked a little bit into CFLR. So the sixth funding source I looked at is whether or not CFLR is directing resources. I heard some mixed things, but typically it hasn't been a whole lot. It's been, at least what I understand of the Crown project, more partners coming in and doing work and bringing some match and leverage resources. And there's a couple other examples where some of the resources were going towards whitebark restoration. RAC funds, that did come up in a couple places. So the Secure Rural Schools Act provided counties with funding and additional funding if they used a resource advisory committee. It's basically a committee of 15 individuals that looked at restoration projects across a district or a forest, and basically ranked those and provided funding for those projects. So some whitebark pine had been done through RAC funding before. That has sort of expired, but in that piece of legislation I mentioned before, I believe there is an extension of the concept. The Interagency Special Status Sensitive Species, or ISSSSP. There's so many acronyms in this space. This is one for, given that it's a candidate species, it provides resources. If it's within the priority for the regional forester, and there are resources available through this mechanism, they can go to whitebark pine restoration. It seems to be more, as resources, say, from forest health are declining, or other resources are declining, this has kind of come up in Region 6 in particular. And Andy, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but it's a flexible funding source in what it can fund. The National Forest Resource Restoration, or the Integrated Resource Restoration line item. This is about kind of a concept, a pilot program that was initiated in 2012 in 3 different regions of the Forest Service, 2 of which are within the range of the of a whitebark pine ecosystem, Region 1 and Region 4. And basically the concept was to kind of bust down some of those silos within the Forest Service budget structure to facilitate cross-programmatic planning and resource allocation for better implementation. That was the idea. So I was not really shocked, but interested to learn that this has actually been a pretty good tool for whitebark pine restoration in Region 1 and Region 4 since 2012. And that whitebark pine actually ranks out pretty well in the list of projects that get proposed. And then the last one that came up was the GYCC funding pool. And again, this is a very specific regional focus with flexible resources, trying to get the money to the ground for restoration work. And from what I can tell, it's been pretty successful. So some overarching findings. At the moment, restoration work is largely self-directed. It's happening where you have passionate people that are able to cobble together resources from any number of sources and getting projects in the pipeline and implemented. I think flexible funding sources are needed, especially when you're seeing the sort of ebb and flow of resources that are appropriated year to year. We need to be thinking a little bit more broadly about where we're pulling in the money and getting towards that planting strategy that Gary was talking about. And again, of the appropriated funds, the NFVW, Forest Health, and NFRR are the most significant sources of funding for planting. That database query that I mentioned from the Washington office found 45 projects, 72% of which were in Region 1 for about 7,000 acres, and that's between 2006 and 2016. So in the last 10 years or so, based on that data at least, there's been about 7,000 acres of whitebark pine planting in the U.S. I don't know if that's an overestimate, an underestimate, but that's at least what the Forest Service has been tracking. The survey results that I mentioned from the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation, it tracks pretty closely with what I heard anecdotally in my interviews. So we saw a lot of money from the Forest Health Program, the majority of the resources going into whitebark pine planting. Again, the NFVW and other appropriated funds, some KV funds, which are most likely the CWKV2 funds, Reforestation Trust Fund, stewardship agreements and contracts, and some additional resources. You've got the Reforestation Partnership Program. All right, so just a couple more slides here. I want to talk a little bit about regional variability. What I observed is that the strategies and the funding pools that come together to implement projects really varies pretty significantly across even the forest level, from forest to forest, let alone region to region. Influencing factors, the timing and availability of funding, the knowledge or expertise of personnel seeking out that funding. So it's one thing to be really passionate, but if you've got passion that doesn't have the expertise or know where to go to get the resources, then it's not going to be very effective. And then again, how leadership prioritizes Whitebark pine is probably the most significant factor. In Region 1 and Region 4, the flexibility through both the GYCC funds and the whole framework there, as well as the NFRR funds, I think are really interesting to think about going forward as we talk about a national restoration strategy. What have we learned about that experience in using that integrated budgeting approach and using that kind of integrated planning approach of the GYCC? Some data points coming out of the Greater Yellowstone area, based on conversations with Ellen and a couple others, these are typically the resources that are going into projects. So it's really cobbling together 4 or 5 different funding sources in order to hit that planting threshold. Versus, say, in Region 6, where you don't have either the NFRR funds or the GYCC funds, you see that movement towards the ISSSSSP funds in the forest health as resources to get planting done on the ground. That's just kind of more of the same. I mean, I've just been observing, I think a real key takeaway is I've been observing pretty significant variability in how projects are paid for and what funding is going towards them. So is that a sustainable model when you look to scale up? I don't know the answer, but something that we should probably be thinking about. I also looked at opportunities with states. There's a big push with Good Neighbor Authority. A lot of the states that have Good Neighbor agreements now are looking at developing income, having their programs be basically a source of income to go off and implement more work. The state of Idaho is really pushing that. Oregon's pushing that. Montana's pushing that. Whether or not whitebark pine is part of the picture, I think remains to be seen. But interestingly enough, I talked to Mo Bookwalter with the Forest Service, who manages that relationship with the state of Montana, and she's saying, you know, it's really a shared responsibility to define what those priorities are. So if the Forest Service in a region says, we really need to be going after whitebark pine, that should hopefully start the conversation with the state forester and partners at the state level about getting some of those resources allocated through G&A projects. The big question here is whether or not you can use those resources in roadless areas. There's some language in the Farm Bill that isn't really clear about that. And then just the last piece, I've been recently involved with conversations in Oregon, Washington, and it's pretty apparent if they are successful at the state level in passing climate policy, there'd be pretty significant funding resources available on the scale that the state has never seen, those 2 states have never seen for forest restoration. A lot of it is going towards other priorities, such as fuels work and that kind of thing. But there's potentially an opportunity there, given the nexus to climate change. One of the things that came up pretty consistently was some fairly strong partnerships to build upon with tribes both in the Northwest and in the Northern Rockies. And there's a group in Southern Oregon doing some really good work through stewardship agreements with the Klamath tribes, which could be a model to look at as far as getting resources to the ground. So you guys may want to check out Lomacatsi Restoration Project for their work. The last thing that I looked at was really opportunities with corporations, and I just very briefly touched the surface, but when you think about the iconic nature, the aesthetic qualities, and just that value of whitebark pine, there is an opportunity to appeal to the outdoor industry, and it's a significant recreation base in the United States that's using these high elevation environments. So to communicate with them, find that point of passion about those environments, and hopefully get to their pocketbooks at some point. I mean, that's really the challenge. And hopefully, I think that's something that Eric's going to figure out through American Forests. I'm not sure. So last parting thoughts. We heard from Diana about we need to think like the nutcracker, but I also think we should be thinking like the sage grouse. In recent memory, we had this great partnership that came together, really unprecedented across ownerships at different levels of governance to try to do something to stave off a listing. Whether or not that is applicable or we can draw any lessons from that, I just think we should maybe think about that, because that's really the scale of activity that it took. Multiple states, multiple agencies. We need consistent and flexible funding at larger scales. I think possibly the NFRR and ISSSP could be one model to look at. We should consider allowing partner funds to apply to more than just the cost of seedlings and putting the seedlings in the ground. But I think sort of the quid pro quo is there has to be some assurance that those resources are actually going to be additional. One thing that came up in conversations around stewardship is, could you actually have a resource-rich forest that has a big stewardship contracting program within the region, basically adopt a forest that doesn't, and use some of those resources creatively to get projects implemented in this environment. So I think there's a lot of reasons why that is probably not feasible, but crazier things have been done. We should look at opportunities. There's some stewardship agreements with the Longleaf Alliance, the Nature Conservancy, Mule Deer Foundation, and others that have been very, very successful and have brought in a lot of outside partner funds. So as we move into implementation mode, what other examples can we look to and borrow from? Cobbling together funds to stitch together restoration is a very noble action, but probably not ideal if you're trying to save a species from extinction. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. So the way we were thinking how this would go is I'm going to give a little bit of insight from the nonprofit perspective at American Forests, and then we kind of open it up to some questions with Gary, Brian, myself. Hopefully you've got some good ones to offer. So I'll start off. American Forests is the nation's oldest nonprofit. We were founded in 1875. Since about 1990, we started to really focus in on tree planting and developing connections with corporations to help fund that. So we planted a lot of trees in a lot of places. We're proud about that, but over the last couple of years, we've been thinking, if we really want to have an impact, we really want to see how we can scale up our investments in certain areas to show a difference. But maybe we should target in certain areas. So we went through this whole process of identifying where could those places be. Whitebark pine was a no-brainer for us. We have been in this space for 20 years. We've worked with the Forest Service and other agencies to cost share about 500,000 trees. And through this process, we've got the chance to reach out to our foundation partners and corporate sponsors to start asking them, tree planting is a key outcome, but there's a whole other range of activities that need to get done, and to get their feedback on what those, how they would respond to that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about today about some of that work with both corporations and foundations. So I'll start with foundations. I think the key, and I should note too that Wes is here from National Forest Foundation. He'll probably have some insights too on this, and feel free to poke him. I don't know where you are. There you are. To get his thoughts too. First thing is, funding one-off projects is becoming harder and harder to do. Foundations really want to see how a project fits into larger landscape goals. And it actually can get more tough than that to say, well, why this one project? Why does this project provide the landscape benefits you're looking for? As an example, I worked with Ellen and Clay a couple years ago to go after some funding for climate adaptation. And they came back and they said, we love the proposal. We've actually never had a high elevation proposal before, but you didn't give enough reasoning about why those specific projects were the ones that were important to do that. Maybe that was my fault. I didn't do a good enough job to explain those away. But I got the message that we need to be able to say why where we're working is adding up and important to the bigger goals that we're doing. And I think that's a key outcome of this restoration plan that we're here talking about today. I think outcomes too, It's a little bit different on the corporation side. We'll talk about that. But foundations are becoming more and more savvy about what exactly are you producing? What benefits are you deriving through these projects? Whether it be through wildlife goals, carbon sequestration, water storage. We need to become better and better about quantifying those. I know Diana and others have been doing a lot of thinking lately about whitebark pine and the water storage component. That'll be a key thing for us to keep thinking through, and how do we communicate that to foundations. And I'll say too, I almost said partnerships, but I think it's a little bit different than that. I think it's collaboration. The big foundations who are putting a lot of money into these large landscape initiatives, they don't want to fund one group. They don't want to say, American Forests, we're going to give you all this money and you manage it. They're not looking for those opportunities. They want to see that American Forest, National Forest Foundation, Arbor Day, Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation are all working together. We're all sharing a landscape plan. We know what we're going to do, and we have a plan for distributing those resources to make sure they get in the ground and go to the right places. So going forward, stitching that together is going to be an important part of how we raise a lot more money, and hopefully can turn around and talk to Forest Service about how we can leverage that with federal funds too. So some key thoughts, I think, from the corporate side there. I'm sorry, the foundation side. So moving to corporate, it's a lot more tricky. We've been pretty good at talking to foundations, corporations. We helped pioneer the dollar per tree model, which I think has been great in some ways, but has had a lot of limitations as we try to invest in complex conservation that you're doing here. We have about 150 different corporate sponsors. Some give as little as $100, and some are several $100,000 in their gifts. The Coca-Cola Foundation is probably the one I'm most excited about, and I think you're starting to see some of these conversations happen. That they're not interested in trees, they're not interested in acres, they're interested in water volume saved. And so we've been able to stitch some projects together across the country to show by doing this restoration, here's how much water volume you can turn around and say you help conserve. So I think that's something to keep an eye on, and ties to what I was saying a second ago on the foundation space. The more we can do that. I will say they're still fairly unique amongst most of our corporate sponsors. We have one that just seemed like a perfect fit to expand for whitebark pine restoration. They're into outdoor recreation, but they sort of looked at us and said, we get it, we understand that, but trees are so easy to communicate to our employees and to our customers. I'm not sure we can get engaged with more specific activities like nurseries and the genetic restoration process. So we've got this challenge with corporations, and we hear it. I'm constantly knowing my development team, we need to sell more than just trees, but they keep saying to me, but they love them. And so I think that's one of our challenges. I don't know if Wes would agree with that too, but it's something we're continue to work at to expand the types of activities we can fund with corporate money. We did a survey of about 10 of our biggest funders, and I laid the case out for whitebark pine restoration. It's a candidate species, it needs help now. We need to plant, starting right now, but we also have to invest in the infrastructure to allow us to do that. Would you be willing to fund these different buckets? They all said tree planting. They could have picked, many other choices. They just didn't. It's just really easy for them. So maybe there's some things we can do to think about how do we make cone collection easy for them, or how do we make sponsoring a plush tree easy for them? So there's some ideas we have to keep thinking through. How do we allow that simple message for consumers and their employees? One bright side of that survey is that 5 of the companies said they'd be interested in sponsoring a core area, which is sort of interesting. I think that means tree planting, but they would be interested in sort of trying to associate themselves with a key area that we come up with identifying. So another area we can try to think about, how do we take that message out to different corporations? So I want to talk a little bit about, throughout the day we've heard some things about we need to do a better job at communicating together the why. What is our message? We're all kind of going on our own to try to figure out different strategies and find different funding. So we work a lot with the Longleaf Alliance, who's been heavily engaged in longleaf pine restoration. And it really is sort of a good story, I think, for us to think about. How does this model fit where we are in our restoration efforts? Longleaf pine really is sort of the darling of the conservation world right now. And I think there's some really good reasons why that we can talk about. It started off as a nonprofit advocacy group, the Longleaf Alliance, in 1995. Just a few people at Auburn University. It slowly grew into sort of this collaboration space where people would get together, share lessons learned. Soon, federal coordinating committees developed around that, and led to this range-wide longleaf pine restoration plan, where they developed these core areas, these 17 implementation team areas across the range of Southeast. It's like 9 states. And it's led to a lot more funding. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the Southern Company, many other foundation corporations come in and dumped a lot of money in. NIFWIF has a $6 million grant program for longleaf pine right now throughout the Southeast. And I think why they were so successful is they had a clear goal. They said, right now we've got about 4 million acres of longleaf pine. We need to be 8 million acres. And here are the places where we can do it, both on state lands, private lands, and federal lands. Here are opportunities to do that. And it's been very successful. Not only did they say, could they point in a map where we need to go, they also could track it too. They had some nice ways to make sure that what they were restoring was easily communicated to the public, that are they making progress or are they not making progress. And so as we start thinking forward, how do we scale up? How do we stitch together all the great work that's going on to attract this big investment, to attract attention from the public that turns around and can point to the federal agencies, say, we've got this funding, this private money, we've got this energy, how can we use that to leverage more money too? I think we've got to be able to bring that together. It's through a coalition like the Longleaf Pine has done. That's probably a good opportunity for us to all communicate, develop these common stories, to all agree to use a common map, and develop some ideas for how we're going to work together in that space. And so we'll end there. Amy Gannon, I don't know if that's your hand, but I think that's your picture. I don't know. You claim this picture? You claim this hand? There she is. Okay, thank you. So at this point, I think we've had some good talk. Gary mentioned the Forest Health Protection Program, its history and current importance to this overall effort. Brian did a lot of good thinking about what are these buckets that are out there, how are they being used, how are different regions being creative in this process. And then kind of finish up with some lessons for us. How do we work together to better tell our story to attract more investment? One, just to open up to see if you have any questions for any of us about this work or the path forward. Yes, Becky.
Comment, question. You talked about corporate and foundation, and of course, Brian talked about agency funding. The audience is Congress and allocating appropriation funds. The reason why longleaf pine is so very popular in Congress is because they have specific areas. Congress really likes to know where their money is going, that there's been thought behind the allocate, like the priorities scheme, and also to be able to check boxes off and say, yes, we've done this, and this is what's happened. And so that's just another funding source that comes through the agencies. So how do we get more congressional interest and funds from the appropriation side of things?
Yeah, great comment. Thank you. Did you folks hear that? Okay. Any other ideas on funding? We've got some time. Any other thoughts you have? Wes?
Yeah, I was thinking about the challenges of corporate fundraising and how a lot of folks that I talk to in the corporate world, they just want to plant a tree so they can write on their CSR report, sustainability report, and done with that. And they don't, honestly, I don't think they care about really at all. But
maybe stand up, please, so we can.
Yeah, sure. I just say I don't think that many corporate partners actually care about whitebark pine, and I think that's because they just don't know the importance of whitebark pine. And I'm thinking back to a few years ago, the New York Times did an article on whitebark pine die-off in Great Yellowstone, and that caught a lot of attention. I think a concerted communications effort that was kind of paved the way for more foundations, corporations, and individuals to be interested in this, to be effective in garnering more
Wish to do it. Sorry, so I think, Bob.
So, since we have a lot of U.S. Fish and Wildlife people in the room, I'd like to put them on the spotlight. Is that if it does become listed, is that another funding pot for restoration?
You certainly see that in other places.
Huh?
You certainly see that in other places.
I don't know. Always wondered.
I think Kyler's probably the best person to answer that question.
Well, I don't know how much is enough, but I think that the important point that I took away was I think a long-term sustained, more permanent pot of money, a permanent effort, bodies, available staffing to, accomplish whatever's laid out in the strategic plan. I think that's going to be essential not only just for the recovery, but if we're looking at, when we're evaluating listing determination, for example, and I know there are folks that would like it to be listed for certain reasons, and there are others who would not like it to be listed for other reasons. I think the extent to which we can get support for a long-term sustained effort, I think a communications plan, a marketing strategy needs to be a part of that strategic conservation effort, because we don't have permanent long-term funding sources. We don't have staffing. We don't have programs that are long-term. We don't have the next generation of biologists going into this effort, in a large scale, en masse for each of our agencies. And so I think things like communicating with our congressionals and really developing a strategy, going to DC and talking to folks and talking to representatives at states that can hold up, whatever accomplishment they can for their districts. And there's that whole structure around it that I think needs to be built. I mean, there's a great foundation here. There's a lot of energy, a lot of effort, a lot of demonstration of what can be done when everybody pulls together. But that kind of needs to be solidified, I think, in a more formal way. And I think that funding component and getting the congressionals involved is essential. So whether we keep it off the list successfully by demonstrating that there is this long-term effort, we're going to get towards recovery, that feeds into it, or we get support for a listed species to range wide, help recover it so that we can get it back off the list. Getting our congressionals on board, that's how it needs to be. So in a way, that's what's happened with the wolves and grizzly bears and other species of interest. We've just got to build that. I think, in my opinion, communications and outreach to people and marketing is just essential. So that's structure. It's got to be a solid structure involved, so that our congressionals can really feel like they're, accountability. They've got to be able to show that accountability. So it can't be squishy. It's got to be solid.
Thanks, Eric. I guess I would start with a program like Slow the Spread, Gypsy Moth. If you look at programs that have been successful in the past and study them, that program, is it still $10 million? Close. For $10 million for the last 25 years, we've been funding Slow the Spread, Gypsy Moth, which has kept Gypsy Moth out of the West Coast. And that's the whole story in one sentence. And it's easy to tell. So we need to, I think, really study these programs and emulate them and copy them. The longleaf pine is a great example. And why is it successful? So as we study these programs, we're going to see some commonalities, like a very strong research background. Gypsy moth, we've been researching that beast for a long time, 20, 30 years. And that is the most highly developed biocontrol program of any pest in the world. I mean, they know where every male moth is in the county along the advancing front. And Congress, You know, you may have your own opinion, and now that I'm retired, I do have my opinion. But they do listen to reason, and the people that they have working for them are pretty smart, those staffers. And the Congress people learn from what the staffers tell them. So they respond to science, and they respond to multiple people coming up, holding hands, saying, this is a good peer-reviewed approach. And they like to know where their money is going to. They like to know that you have the tools to do something, to actually be effective. So there are these common elements of how these programs, why money goes to good things. And we have all the elements here. It's a packaging thing, it's a data thing, but the alliance is here in this room.
Yes.
I'm going to have this really wild comment, and hopefully nobody will throw tomatoes at me. But last week I was in Region 6 talking about sugar pine and western white pine, and now we're in whitebark pine and limber pine. And in reality, it's not just whitebark pine that's valuable, it's all the five-needle pines, eastern white pine. So if we talk about congressional focus, there are places where we grow other five-needle pines that produce timber values, large trees, that kind of stuff. If we took more of an integrated approach and said, you know, what real problems is that all the five-needle pines need to be addressed. And can we take an integrated approach of restoring and working with five-needle pines where we can move money to whitebark pine land where we're not getting a lot of timber values, but we're taking more of an integrated restoration approach for all the five-needle pines. Now, if you think about it, that brings in all the western United States, the Northeast. You're taking a lot of congressional power there when you start bringing in 30 states into the picture. So it's just a fruit for thought. Rather than just focusing on one tree species, there's a lot of issues dealing with all the five-needle pines, and they all deal with bark beetles, and they all deal with blister rust, and they really show an integrated partnership in that. And they all carry different roles in all the ecosystems. Many of them are keystone, not just whitebark pine. So another fruit for thought is to kind of integrate it into all the five-needle pines in the United States and Canada.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. I was thinking too, there might be this sort of this weariness of coming to hear about, well, sugar pine today and it's limber pine tomorrow, instead of trying to treat it all at once. I can imagine that'd be a challenge for us too, communicating. Great thought. That it? You guys got off easily too. All right, thanks very much, everyone. Okay, Bob, you're back on to talk about the best management practices document you pulled together. Thanks.
Okay, so this is going to be a talk about the best management practices, although I hear a lot of people don't like the term best management practices, so we're going to call them possible management actions for restoring whitebark pine. But throughout the talk, you'll see the word, the BMPs throughout, and so that's what we're talking about. So again, putting up Diana's, the overarching goal of whitebark pine restoration is to develop sustainable and healthy and resilient whitebark pine communities in the face of the current and future challenges. So today we've been talking mostly about the plan or the national strategy, which is, you know, kind of a top-down approach to looking at restoring whitebark pine. But what good is a plan without some specific instructions for everybody to use in order to go ahead and restore whitebark pine across its range? And so this BMP, this document, Best Managed Practice document, will be more of a bottom-up set of actions or recommendations or maybe procedures and protocols for you to possibly use when you're going to be doing any restoration activity. So I'm going to be talking about the BMT document. I am not the lead. Diana Tombeck and I are both leads. Diana is actually leading the effort.
I was louder, so I got nominated to do the talk. But I'm going to tell you right now it's more of an outline than a paper, and if you want, please, it's in your set of materials that you were given at registration. You can take it out and follow along with me, and this is what we have as far as meat and potatoes right now. The other thing is that it's completely interactive. If you have any questions, please raise your hand as we go, and we're going to, much more detail is in your outline than what I'm going to present. Okay, I want to tell you right now, as you know, that this document is in draft, and we will send it out for multiple reviews to all of you. So I want all of you to raise your hand right now, and everybody that's raising their hand is one of the authors on this. So thanks. No one raised their hand at all. Thank you, Sandy, for not doing anything there. Okay, it's going to involve many authors and sources, and we're going to talk about the authors right now. And here are all the authors that are going to be in that. Each one has been assigned. Almost a lot of them are right here in the room. So as I go through the best management practices, each one of the people that are going to be associated with a section or chapter in there, please, if I get things wrong, please tell me or stand up and correct and tell the audience whatever. But as we go through each one of these, I hope these people will set me straight or add additional information as we go through this. So one thing about the best management practices is how we should structure the entire report. And if we look at the range-wide strategy, we have the 10 management actions that we are given. But some of those management actions, like conducting research and plan activities, really don't have a set of BMPs, or we have no intention to develop them. So what Diana did, which I think is a good idea, is instead of looking at these 10 general activities, we narrowed our BMPs to the National Whitebark Pine Restoration Strategy. And these are the general categories or chapters that will be in each one of these. And this is how we ended up pretty much classifying what kind of BMPs we're actually talking about. So in this talk, if you want to know what management actions we're talking about, it'll appear in the upper left hand. And if you want to know what chapter it will be in the document when we actually create it, it'll be in the upper right hand. So let's go to the first one. Oops. And the first one, of course, is selecting trees for screening. That's the chapter in the BMP right now, and it falls under gathering seed under the management strategy if you want to go along. So here we've got a set of people in here, Mary Francis and Richard Sinesco, and a bunch of people that are going to talk about what are the detailed protocols for selection of the plus trees. And it'll be based on a comprehensive seed zone map, stand criteria for selection, survey design for selecting trees, and so on. I know some of them are already available, but they'll be under a context underneath these BMPs. Anything more to add to that category? Nothing. Now we go to protocols for creating seed orchards. And in this will be detailed directions or suggestions or recommendations on not only where to locate these things, but where to get your scion, where to do your pollination, how to document the documentation of infectious symptoms that you have on these trees, and definitely field trials for making sure that you're getting from these trees what you want. So seed orchard establishment, which also falls under gathering seed. Yeah.
Comments for that one. Floral induction, we have procedures, as well as we looked out fertilization guidelines.
Okay, good. Sorry.
Back on the seed orchard BMP, I would add 2 bullet items. We have the protocols for the floral induction, as well as fertilization guidelines.
Okay, the next one will be protocols for harvesting whitebark pine cones. And all of you in this room have done this. And if you want to make sure that we get the right protocols in there, please, when the call comes out to review this paper, please get it and help us with stories and suggestions on what the best way to harvest these cones, not only in caging these cones, who should climb them, climbing suggestions, using the tree tongs, as in this photo, how to collect these cones and do minimal damage to the cone-bearing branches, then how to store these cones and so on, including maybe there's been talk of training monkeys to go out and get them or something like that. Okay, the next one is the best management practices for growing the seedlings. And this, of course, is something I have no idea how to do, but somebody is going to write this chapter on how to store the seed, germination tests, nursery techniques, and so on, including mycorrhizal, I hope mycorrhizal inoculations, both in the nursery or maybe in the field when the seedlings are planted. And then, of course, detailed protocols for planting whitebark pine trees. Many of you know Glenda, sitting in the back of the room, and she has since retired, and several people have noticed that it's time to redo those planting protocols, right, Glenda? So hopefully we'll get Glenda out of retirement, helping us out here, and we have a whole bunch of new state growth survey results and so on that can help us update those planting guidelines and get out a brand new set of revised guidelines, because we know a lot more now than we did then. And also, what we don't have is, if you want to sow seeds instead of plant, the research is starting to mature enough so that we can actually maybe do some suggestions on sowing seed instead of planting seedlings. As far as site prep for both seedlings and sowings, and then, of course, what to do for climate change mitigation. In other words, where to plant to mitigate possible climate change factors that may not result in good success. Okay, this is something I do know a lot about, but I'm going to need a lot of help from those people in the room who have actually done these kind of highly modified silvicultural cuttings to get at exactly, some sort of whitebark pine restoration. And these include the criteria that you'd use for stand collection, how you should look at stands that you selected in a landscape context to make sure that you're adding heterogeneity to the landscape, as well as providing for resistance or resilience against insects, disease, and fire. And then also how to conduct these silvicultural cuttings. And I know a while ago, I think, Rob, you were a part of the people that developed the prescription, the generalized prescription for whitebark pine. This is the document that kind of stuff will appear in. And so we hope to use the stuff that's already been done, integrate it in here, give sample prescriptions on several of these thinning selections. We don't know, girdling doesn't look like it's going to be very good in the future, but we're definitely going to concentrate on some silviculture cuttings, and of course the prescribed fire activities, how to light, what you should do as far as lighting, and then we'll have a bunch of prescription templates in there for you to download or copy from the actual PDF that you can use in yours. And then what you should do to make sure that your thinning and your prescribed burning treatments are the most effective. There are several other treatments that you can do in concert with your thinning and prescribed burning that will ensure that it'll be effective not only at the moment, but also for a longer period of time. And then there are some proactive wildfire treatments that we're going to use. This is falls, and this is the other thing I wanted to mention, is that a lot of these particular best management practices fall into several categories. For instance, this particular silvicultural treatment will also fall over into the next category, which is wildland fire management. And you can use these silvicultural treatments to do pre-fire fuel treatments to prevent some of your mortality in the cone-bearing whitebark and so on. And so we just got done writing a pretty detailed best management practices for the Crown of the Continent for this, but we have, we're going to, in this particular one, we'll expand it to you include the whole range of possible conditions and what full suppression activities you can do. And one of the major questions we're always getting asked is, should we try to suppress fire in whitebark pine stands? And for those of you involved in the fires that happened this summer, you know that a lot of them burn in whitebark pine, especially the Lolo Lola fire. And there were constant questions by the fire crews on whether or not they should, use these whitebark pine stands as a last resort, whether they should do some burnout operations within whitebark pine stands because they have lower fuels than the surrounding, and so on. And so hopefully there'll be a set of best management protocols for fire managers to use in that situation. But also there are some partial suppression activities they could do. I've been on projects where they've actually wrapped whitebark pine with fire shelters and so on. We're not going to advocate that, but there are things that they can do during a fire that may help save these whitebark pine trees that may be resistant to rust. And also, wildland fire use is going to be a big part of this, and wildland fire use, most of you that are on a fire team know that whitebark pine is almost always cited as one of the reasons why they're going to allow a wildland fire to go. So wildland fire use is going to be our biggest tool in restoration, and we should have a bunch of wildland fire use prescriptions that people have used in the past and so on in that. Is there anything else on that? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. These proactive wildfire management would be, for instance, okay, I'm going to put in a fuel treatment that is also restoration treatment, but I'm going to, instead of leaving the fuel on the ground, like if you went in and thinned, I'm going to take it off so that I know that if a fire happens in there, it won't crown and kill my whitebark pine that I'm really concerned about. That's one of the possible many proactive wildfire treatments that we're talking about. Is that answer? Okay. Anybody else? Okay, and lastly, and Anna, please chime in here. Anna Shuttle is a real proponent, I am too, of this. Let's not concentrate all our treatments into those stands that are really, really bad. Let's do some proactive restoration in stands that may be healthy now so that we can increase their resilience and make sure that they add to resilience not only at the stand level but at the landscape level. And so here's where we want to, if we want to do landscape level treatments that will add heterogeneity to the landscape and maybe help not only whitebark pine be more resilient to insect disease in the future, but also maybe fire as well. For instance, you might think about landscape level treatments in lodgepole pine below whitebark pine in order to minimize the number of host species on the landscape so that you won't get really high mountain pine beetle populations and so on. Anything else on that, Anna, you want to add? Or? All right, thank you. And then, of course, there will be some pretty detailed protocols and hopefully a set of databases and so on that will allow you to assess the level of rust infection and that will allow you to monitor restoration treatments. And we hopefully will come up with something I know the Crown of the Continent and the GYCC Whitebark Pine committees are searching for monitoring protocols and databases, and hopefully we'll be able to work together to come to something that everybody can use. Okay, some information that will also be in there is Diana has a great little spreadsheet of all the possible treatments that are in whitebark pine. I think you're going to talk about this tomorrow. Yeah, and if you have time, or if that cycles on to you, please add in what you paid for your treatments in whitebark pine. How much did you pay for a prescribed burning per acre and so on? And hopefully we'll be able to summarize this across that and put all that into the best management practices. And of course, there'll be a list of technologies that may help you with this, from LiDAR and so on. That will be in there. And then the linkage to monitoring, of course, and then I'll also make sure that all the climate change information is integrated throughout the entire document. So right now it looks like that Diana is going to lead the effort, and she is going to do the article in a peer-reviewed journal for the best management practices. that will have a summary of all those, and then there will be a GTR that will come out, which I will lead, that will have all the detail that you will need that we gathered throughout. And so there'll be both a forest article and a GTR that will summarize all the best management practices that we came up with. And so to end, it's just that it's, you know, a national strategy really isn't any good unless you have the instructions on how to do it across the landscape. And this, of course, a lot of people in this room have been doing this for a long time, and they know exactly what they need to do. But this document is more for the people that will be involved in the next generation of people that will be restoring whitebark pine. And also, you can look at this as the document that fits in with the 2012 and the range-wide strategy coupled with the climate change document. This will be the third one that sits in there that will be how to do the bottom-up stuff to get the strategy done. And with that, I'll open it up to questions or comments. Diana?
I just want to say that if you have costs and you're interested in adding them to our, if you have done restoration and you have some costs which are varying greatly geographically depending on where you are and depending on what jurisdiction you are, what government agency, we'd love to have them. So please email me. You can email me through the Whitebark Pine website, Ecosystem Foundation website, and I'm happy to share our spreadsheet with you, and you can add to it and get credit for it. We'd really appreciate it. The second thing I want to say is clearly we've got a primary objective here, and that is to deliver a draft national restoration strategy for whitebark pine. That's first on the list. It's going to take a while to get the best management practices general technical report going, but that will come out after we've got the other one at least reasonably long. So please don't hold your breath, but we will be in touch. Thank you.
Yes.
So I don't know if it belongs in the strategy or in the BMP, but I'm wondering if there's a section we could add to strategies on how to work through some of the regulatory limitations that we have in managing in these landscapes, like in wilderness areas. Some of the things the practitioner may encounter and thought processes to get through there so we can do activities in these areas.
Oh, okay. Huh, that's a good idea. Where would that sit, Diana, in the... well, yeah, that's a good...
You're going to get different interpretations of those policies each place you go. So we have a national guidance that would kind of streamline it so that everybody's not reinventing the wheel on how to work through those regulations.
Right.
Yeah, I would just say we're learning ourselves, and this is something of obviously concern to a lot of people here and a lot of jurisdictions. And you know, our goal would be to include that either in the best management practices or the strategy. The strategy would probably be the best place. So we have a lot to learn right now. We're as concerned as you guys are, because it does affect the identification of these core areas, and we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. We're painfully aware of this fact and would like to see if we can find some mediation, compromises, and solutions so we can do some things in wilderness areas that are deemed reasonable. So we're totally on your wavelength. Thank you.
First thing that ran through my mind was, who is going to write that thing? Because it definitely won't be me. You guys have to do it more than I do. So, but yeah, that's a great idea. Anything else? Yeah.
So we'll probably contribute to growing whitebark.
Yes, right. Yes.
Storing seedlings, but since this is a not just a regional publication, I know Dorina does their stratification a little different than we do, and BC Ministry of Forestry does their stratification a little bit different as well. So we have to collect all those treatments and put them together in that chapter.
Correct, yeah. Right. Yep, good point. Yeah.
When you're collecting data on the cost information, are you asking for not only the treatment implementation, but maybe NEPA costs, other costs associated besides just the treatment?
Okay, so what we do is you have the spreadsheet, and then the cost, and then there are two columns in there to indicate what is embedded in the cost. In other words, you know, was fuel augmentation in your fuel treatment cost and so on. So you'd have to document that in, you know, the cost you put down, you have to document it in the comment section. Does that answer your question? No?
People are putting maybe a different treatment method. That's pretty straightforward, whether it's prescribed burning or hand thinning. But a lot of people may not think, well, the NEPA aspect is a cost too, and they may not think that was something, information you're trying to.
Okay. Yeah, right. Right now the costs don't include NEPA, but maybe we should add another part that would be how much was it to. All right, we'll think about that. Good idea.
You raise a really good point, and the good point is we didn't think about all the administrative costs that necessarily go along with implementation. I know there's a cost for supervision often when there is restoration. So with these spreadsheets, you're free to add categories. We're happy to have you add categories and help us. So if you've got NEPA costs there, add that category and tell us, you know, what the time frame was that the cost was for and all that. So, sure.
Yeah, one thing we're learning about costs is that it's apples and oranges almost always. So we're going to have to publish the entire thing in its, you know, or summarize it in another way. But we won't be able to take an average across all the costs because they're apples and oranges.